this looks bad, as there's a portion of the Raptors fan base right now that's fired up over some comments made by Rich Paul regarding his client, Brandon Ingram. And specifically, comments are being misinterpreted as him saying the Raptors overpaid for Brandon Ingram, but nonetheless, it has people fired up, and for a decent reason. So we'll discuss that, including the Raptors collapse out there in Summer League over the weekend, and some interesting developments that happened for this Raptors team and their loss to the Kings, and just overall major takeaways from the Summer League team. So lots of stuff to break down out here in this video, but before we dive into that, folks, I appreciate every single one of you that have been hitting the subscribe button. As of late, we're very, very close to that 39,000 subscriber goal we've had for the last couple of weeks, so make sure you guys hit that sub button if you don't want to miss a single thing with this Raptors team, especially as things get quieter the offseason. A lot of things get overlooked, but you won't miss it here on Raptors Digest. But hit that subscribe button down below. It's free. Let's dive into the news, because there is some very interesting developments to discuss right now, specifically regarding Brandon Ingram and his agent Rich Paul, as the Raptors are a little bit in a weird situation. It's been the whole topic of discussion this entire offseason. The cap situation, the second apron. Are the Raptors overpaying for their squad that didn't even make the playoffs last year? Well, to add fuel to the fire, Rich Paul just came out with some comments saying that I don't want to continue. I'm pressing the wrong buttons here. But basically, I don't want to continue to dampen free agency. I went through it this year with Brandon Ingram, having him traded from New Orleans and then doing his deal during the season with the Raptors. Basically saying, I did that because if he had got to the open market, there was not much opportunity there, and he's now making $40 million per year over the next 3 years, and that probably wouldn't have been there for him if we got to quote-unquote free agency. Now, this comment has a lot of Raptors fans, specifically the people that haven't really been in the Bobby Webster and the Masai Ujiri camp over the past few seasons, post the bubble, post the Tampa Tank season. There is a huge contingent of fans that have not been happy with the moves the Toronto Raptors have made. And these comments from Rich Paul really add fuel to the fire. Now, I'm going to first say, I'm still happy the Raptors did what they did, traded for Brandon Ingram and extended him. I am not coming out and saying this is a bad move by any circumstances given the current context, because you bring in a very, very talented player, Brandon Ingram, at 27 years old, averaging 22 points per game, 5.6 rebounds, 5 assists. A guy that gets buckets. He's a strong shooter. He is a guy that's a very phenomenal basketball player. I do not mind about the contract. I do not mind the deal that the Raptors end up having to sign to bring in Brandon Ingram, with the 3 years, basically $38 million this season, $40 million next season, and $42 million in 27-28. I don't think this is a bad move whatsoever. But the optics of this, it just looks bad, because the Toronto Raptors right now are in a spot where they are paying a lot of money for a lot of players that have been on this team for a decent amount of time and frankly are not, didn't lead this team to a lot of winning last year. Now, this was partly done strategically. The Raptors had a lot of injuries. They had a lot of guys sit out the back half of the year. The squad was trying to rebuild, develop, and find some young guys to fill out the rotation and move forward into the future. So don't get me wrong on that front. I still think this group is a lot more talented, but nonetheless, this team is very, very expensive. And I think there's a lot of people, even a lot of people, understand the logic behind trading for Brandon Ingram and making this move at the deadline, because we didn't give up that much. Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown, and then a first. That first would have been all right with Tyrese Halliburton tearing his Achilles, and it would have been more valuable. You wouldn't have known that at the time. The Pacers were one of the better teams in the league. That is what it is. I still think that's a strong trade to give out for Brandon Ingram. I think it's a great trade for the Toronto Raptors. But then the extension comes in at $40 million annually. And now you have his agent coming out and directly stating that that money was not there for him in free agency. It just wasn't there. You weren't going to be able to, give him that type of deal, give him that type of bread if you were one of those other teams out there in NBA free agency. So basically, it all comes down to the comments, the period of who are the Toronto Raptors negotiating with? And we've heard this argument pop up a ton in regards to basically a lot of the extensions that have came around out here now at this point. I've heard it most recently regarding Jakob Poeltl. Now, I think there would have been a massive market for Jakob Poeltl if he were to hit free agency or if he were to hit that open market. So I don't think it falls in the camp of a Jakob Poeltl extension, but really, it was big time brought up in regards to the Immanuel Quickley conversations because, $32 million per year for a guy that, hasn't really proven he could consistently be that top level point guard, an upper echelon PG at the, he's shown flashes of it, but injuries have really hampered his ability to stamp his mark on the NBA about, hey, I really deserve this bread. I deserve this type of contract and stuff. But he's the big one that's been brought up, and the albatross contract that people are discussing. And you've seen some people around the league say Scottie Barnes doesn't deserve $50 million per year. What has he done? Now he's been an all-star. He's shown tremendous growth defensively. Of course, he needs a proof, but there's a lot of these arguments getting thrown out. It's like, who the heck were you competing with to give up all that money? And now Rich Paul's agents essentially says, hey, there wasn't much competition to make $30-40 million per year. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have extended Brandon Ingram, but could you have got him at more of a, lower 30s annually? Could the Toronto Raptors have been out here and, signed Brandon Ingram, brought him into the mix, kept him into his contract situation at a lesser number than the $40 million per year? That's the real conversation. You look at, guys that we all thought would be overpaid. Cam Thomas, Jonathan Kuminga, Josh Giddey, all these dudes that people were worried about the contracts. There's no real competition to give them that type of deal out there this offseason. So would there have been for Brandon Ingram? Who really knows? The Atlanta Hawks were very interested in him at the trade deadline as well. So I think if he didn't sign an extension, they wouldn't have made the Kristaps Porzingis deal. They would have adjusted their cap situation to probably run a lot of money at the Raptors. But it's something that doesn't look very good when agents essentially say there wasn't really much competition to give him a ton of money. And in the modern NBA with the second apron issues with all these rules, it does look like a little bit of an overpay. So not the worst thing in the world. I don't think it's, if we're looking at bad money on the Toronto Raptors, I don't think Brandon Ingram's by any means the worst unless he's dealing with a ton of injuries over the next few seasons. But basically, it's a move I still would have done, but it would have been nice to negotiate down a cheaper number. So let me know what you guys think about that, but let's dive also into Summer League because the Toronto Raptors ended up getting smoked in the final game of Summer League, 98-88. Now, they were down big time throughout most of the game. They ended up making a nice little comeback there at the end, but basically, Isaac Jones ended up dominating the squad. That, even though we do have two quote-unquote NBA caliber center, I think Ulrich Shamshay showed a lot during Summer League. This is by far his worst game out there in Summer League. It 60 minutes of action, 6 fouls, and 3 turnovers, no points. Did have 7 boards, but the Raptors had a hole at the center position with Shamshay being out there in foul trouble, and CMB also just not having his best performance after coming off, really standout game for the Raptors in the second last game against the Golden State Warriors. So, the front court was depleted. Colin Castleton has really played his way out of any opportunities getting a full-time roster spot, in my opinion. He did not look good, and he's going to be followed out of the depth chart for sure, after his Summer League performances. But the Raptors got cooked out there at the big man position. That's why they lost. But I'm not going to come out and say, oh, Summer League was a catastrophe because, they had one bad game against the Kings, specifically at the big man position. The negative takeaways to certainly take away from this one is Shamshay still needs some development. So the reason he was on a 2-year, 2-way contract. CMB, not going to be perfect by any means, night in, night out. Castleton's kind of on his way out. And then, Jamison Battle, he's been hustling on defense, got burned a few times out there on the wing, but still knocked down his shots. But I'm not worried about Jamison Battle being, a top defender of the league. There were some positives. And Mobo, I think, also, the foul trouble and stuff. You'd like to see him have a stronger performance, especially with the other bigs out there in the mix. And Isaac Jones being a similar size player. You like to see Mobo just have a stronger Summer League, but he's been dealing with some injuries. The couple things that are huge positives, and the thing I really want to just discuss the final game, and the whole Summer League as a whole. Jamal Shead is a monster, man. That dude, I get the 3-point shot, still not phenomenal. I get that, last season we were hoping, just given his stats last year, she had 32% from the 3-point line. Now, he did make 39% from his corner threes, but, as a 6-foot guard, you want to see him knock down more 3-point shots. These were stats over the course of last regular season, but this dude did everything he could to get the Toronto Raptors to win. 24 points, 12 assists, 4 boards, intense defense. He did have 5 turnovers, but that is what it is. But 9-16 shooting, and just was the engine of this Raptors group. And he is proving that even with the up and down jump shot, this dude has the poise, he has the confidence, he has literally it all in terms of being that next type of guard that has that star mentality. Will he become that? I don't know, but he has that it factor. Of course, the jump shot needs to come along for him to take a Kyle Lowry-esque leap, to take even a Fred VanVleet-esque leap. He needs to become a better jump shooter, but this dude's mentality, his energy, his poise, his leadership cannot be understated. We talked about Immanuel Quickley being overpaid a little bit. His contract's a little bit high. Jamal Shead could be waiting in the wings to be that starting guard for the Toronto Raptors moving forward in the future if he just gets that three-point jump shot, knocking down at a high level. So really impressed with what I saw from Jamal Shead, even though the Raptors did have an ugly game against the Kings. Let me know what you guys think about the Toronto Raptors Summer League. Might make a full breakdown and stuff in terms of things that are going on. But you guys are the best. Hit that subscribe button if you guys haven't already. I'm signing now. Cheers.